And without further ado, I would like to announce about our next program that we have. But for this announcement, I would like to invite David Corbin, Director of Content Strategy at Tech in Asia. David, can you come on stage?
All right, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for attending Tech in Asia Singapore 2016. So for the next session, it was originally about emerging markets, and we're going to feature some great speakers from Beirut as well as from Pakistan. But unfortunately, due to some unforeseen circumstances, they're not able to join us. So what we're doing instead, we're keeping the same moderator, Dmitry Levit of Digital Media Partners. We're keeping the same panelist, Hanno Stegmann, who is co-CEO of Rocket Internet APAC. We are adding Stefan Jung, who is Managing Director of Ventura Capital based out of Indonesia. And they are going to talk about, let's see the new title slide. They're going to talk about e-commerce in Southeast Asia, Alibaba, Lazada, and what's next. As many of you know, Lazada kind of exited to Alibaba yesterday, and there are no better people in the region to talk about this than these three guys right now. They're going to talk about the deal, what it means for e-commerce in Southeast Asia, and what it might mean for opportunities further afield. So please give them a warm round of applause. Come on out, guys.
Thank you for this introduction, David. Now, small correction. Not three guys best positioned to talk about this topic, two. My firm has been hiding from Rocket for the last 5 years, as far as our e-commerce investments are concerned. I give you Hanno and Stefan. I'll give you guys a few seconds to introduce yourselves and what you do, and then we will dive straight into it, whatever it is.
Great to be here. I'm basically running the Asia Pacific portfolio of Rocket, which is all the ventures we set up. We launch here from Pakistan to Australia, excluding India. So Lazada, Zalora, the two big ones, are actually not part of my portfolio, but still happy to talk about it a little bit at least. And great to be here.
My name is Stefan. I guess I was the person in charge of what Hanno is doing now. So I came to Southeast Asia in 2011 to start Rocket Internet here in the region. So I helped start Zalora as the first venture, Lazada the second one, Food Panda, and so forth. So it was like 10 ventures over the 3+ years I spent there. And last year I started a venture capital fund together with my partners called Ventura Capital. We're a $150 million fund based in Jakarta.
Thank you for the introductions. Now then, so as we spoke just now, behind the stage, inflection points, right? It's very difficult to predict what happens when one hits. And I think nobody quite envisioned, maybe apart from a couple of guys in a dark room somewhere, what would happen 5 years ago when you guys gathered and started planning for Zalora and Lazada. So that was the first big inflection point. We all know what happened next. $500 million or more of investment came into this region. This region got on the map. A whole lot of people from all over the world came here to build ventures. Yesterday's event has all the earmarks of another inflection point. Whether this is the beginning of big liquidations in Southeast Asia, or whether this is the beginning of interaction with Chinese ecosystem. Any predictions as to how it will play out across any range of matters from buzz to fundraising environment? I'll start with Stefan, perhaps.
Like my view is that like it was a great day yesterday for the whole ecosystem in Southeast Asia. Alibaba is one of the large global names in the e-commerce space. So I guess it was like a point of validation of having such a large investment here in the region. So I still remember when we started in 2011, there was always the question, is it not too early? And I think that was just like a huge confirmation yesterday that the investment was officially announced, that we are it was just a validation of the huge potential. And to your question, I really believe we're just at the beginning of it. So I think that will have like a trigger effect. We kind of see the first liquidation events. Everybody was always kind of asking the question about exits. So I think we're at the start of like seeing also really large exits, which kind of like really kickstarts the whole cycle. It will attract more global investment to the region. It will attract more great serial entrepreneurs, which will see this as the region to start their businesses. So I think it will just trigger a lot of things, and I think it was a great event for the overall ecosystem here in Southeast Asia.
I would completely agree with that. I think what I would like to underline from what you have been saying is the phrase validation, because especially I think for Rocket Internet, it's also great validation that what we have done here was kind of the right thing. It was kind of the right strategy to be extremely early in Southeast Asia, to build ventures like Lazada here extremely early, to focus on e-commerce, to focus on being one of the first movers in this ecosystem, try to bring in more people, bring in investments, bring in talent, try out things extremely early. And then, of course, we all know, and every entrepreneur knows that, you can have a lot of great success stories on paper, but unless you then also make the exit and make such a deal happen, you're not there yet. And I think the announcement of this transaction was kind of and is a great validation, but I also would say there's so many more things to come, because there are so many other ventures that can be built in Southeast Asia and in the markets. And we also talked about that we are now trying to replicate something like this in other markets as well, and even going the next step now to markets like Pakistan, to markets like Bangladesh, to markets like Myanmar. And I think I told you that a couple of weeks ago that we just raised also a significant amount of money for our e-commerce venture Daraz, which is exactly active in these three markets, where we want to build the next Lazada. And apart from, let's say, building the next Lazada in these pioneer markets, I think there are still so many opportunities in the other Southeast Asian markets as well, where we can build mobile discovery platforms. We are building a company called Like, basically to tap into that space there. There are just so many more opportunities, and I think the whole ecosystem will profit from that. More funding, attention from entrepreneurs, etc., etc. So first, I'm super proud of the Lazada team, and happy that they had probably a great party yesterday night, and we'll probably have a very good time now, but still a lot of work to do. But on the other hand, I think the whole ecosystem and everybody here can be extremely happy and proud, because it will be the first step into a lot of new things to come and more things to come.
So folks who know me in the crowd would know that I am about to launch into a sequence of skeptical questions, and we are before lunch anyway, so we need to liven it up. But before I do that, from the bottom of my heart, guys, could everybody please just give a round of applause to the entire team behind this transaction, on Rocket side, on Goldman Sachs, on Alibaba side. This was an amazing advancement for the ecosystem. But now, validation, sure. Let's talk about other emerging markets in a bit. But would that mean that basically you guys are moving on? Southeast Asia is done, everything has been built, time to focus on Myanmar, Bangladesh, Pakistan, and further afield? Or if I were to ask this question a little bit less provocatively, Alibaba is massive, very influential, has proper infrastructure that they've now pretty much acquired control of in Southeast Asia. Repercussions for other e-commerce players, up and down the value chain, from wholesalers to the operators of destinations, to payments, to performance advertising. Any thoughts? Duck and hide?
So first part of your question, I would answer, certainly there's a lot of more opportunities as said, right? So one element is definitely to say the more established business models, like a typical e-commerce player, can we do that in other markets as well? And there's so much more potential, right? So if you look at a company like Daraz, as said, in these three markets active, but we have also Kemu that also expands to Sri Lanka, to Cambodia, to Laos, to Nepal. So I think there are so many more countries to capture. And just if you look at, let's say, the pure e-commerce model, even there, I see still a lot of untapped opportunities, a lot of kind of white spaces that you can fill with great teams, with great business models. So definitely, there's much more to do also in the e-commerce space. But secondly, that doesn't mean, especially doesn't mean for us, that we are now only looking at these markets, because the whole ecosystem is just still developing, also in countries like even Singapore, but also Indonesia, also the Philippines, also Thailand, also Vietnam, Malaysia, everywhere. So it probably means for us that we look also for the next generation of business models in these countries, rather than doing a pure e-commerce company only. So we are experimenting with, I said, with a new concept that we just started, Zen rooms in the hotel space. We are going in the whole travel and booking space with a company called Javago. So we are trying to do basically the next thing and move along with the ecosystem, still by trying to be, let's say, the pioneers in some segments, while others are probably still looking at e-commerce. We start then trying to do the next thing in the more advanced, in emerging markets, and then going to the real pioneers in a way as a two-step strategy. Yeah?
Understood. So you're in a good place. Stefan, what are we going to do? Alibaba never stays put in one vertical. It expands until it stops. So, time to leave?
No. For me, obviously as a venture capitalist, this is great. This is a proof point. There can be exits. That gives confidence for you and for me. It makes it probably easier to raise our own funds in order to invest in entrepreneurs. So that's what I kind of meant at the beginning with the whole ecosystem. And I guess the easiest is, it's always easier to talk, but like when we put the money, that is like the clearest signal. And since we launched our fund last year, we have made 16 investments across Southeast Asia, in Indonesia, in Malaysia, in Singapore, in Hong Kong, in Vietnam. So I guess that is the biggest testament that we're very actively investing, because there are great opportunities. And now kind of like a little puzzle piece or quite a big puzzle piece that was missing, the question on, are strategic investors from around the world looking at Southeast Asia as a very attractive region? So that was like a great event yesterday, and we have seen iProperty last year, and we see these exits, and I do really fundamentally expect that will trigger a lot more global strategic investors to look at the region for acquisitions, for investments. So I think as I said, and I really mean it, that we're literally just at the start. So I'm not running away. To the contrary, I'll jump full in.
Understood. Second degree consequences, though, and this is again for Stefan, because this is also something we like discussing when we get together. Fundraising environment and levels of hype in the ecosystem. So let's talk some numbers. What was that, $2 billion raised for this market and still investable? And last year, depends on who you believe, if you leave all the outlier rounds aside, maybe about $1 billion, $1.5 billion has been invested across this region, across all ventures, across everything, apart from perhaps Rocket and a couple of SoftBank deals. Now, after Garena announcement, iProperty, Lazada, are we going to be flooded with cash? Is it going to be an overheated market? Good for entrepreneurs, bad for VCs? What's the take?
Yeah. So I guess the question over the last months, the last 6 months, that I probably had to answer the most often was, is the nuclear winter coming, or are we already in a nuclear winter? So I have always been very vocal about it, that I'm just very optimistic. I guess it would have probably helped me more if I would have said yes, nuclear winter is here, no one will be raise money to scare entrepreneurs. But actually, I was always very vocal that I'm very, very optimistic. And probably the one thing that I'm more concerned is an overheating of the market, probably in 2017, beginning of 2017, because it's just right how everything works. As a VC, we raise a 8 to 10 year lifetime of our fund, and we have a 4-year investment period, a 5-year investment period. So all the funds that have been not investing the last 12 months, their limited partners at some point will say what are you doing with our money? So they need to invest that capital. And then I'm afraid that probably too much capital will chase too few really good deals, and hence we'll see like a huge spike in valuation multiples. So hence I'm pretty happy that we have been very vocal of being optimistic and having invested. And I'm less concerned about the nuclear winter. I'm probably more concerned about beginning 2017, that probably will see more like an overheating of the market from an investment point of view. So it will be a much better environment for entrepreneurs again. Then I'm slightly more concerned for the investors that just too much money will chase too few really good deals.
A nuclear summer, perhaps.
It will be the tropical summer of Southeast Asia.
Well, so Rocket continues building new ventures here and in frontier markets. VCs on top of this hype wave will raise tons of money, and there'll be $4 or $5 billion looking for a home in Southeast Asia. Where are the buyers? So you poked one, and one major player from China is finally here. There's been attempts, there's been Baidu presence on the ground for a while, there's been JD.com launching this and this and that. What's your take? Is this the first step of many as far as Chinese strategics in Southeast Asia are concerned? Or is this a one-off and then there could be a few years of wobbliness like we saw, for example, from Japanese ecosystem and from Rakuten?
No, I mean, I would say it's definitely has a great potential to become a proof point that also, let's say, a Chinese strategic buyer can tap into this market, make something very successful out of it, and to do more and more transactions. So of course, I think the whole setup also of the deal and what we want to achieve is of course to build an extremely strong partnership, and then of course the best outcome for the ecosystem would be an Alibaba saying, you know, I do this again and I do it again and again, and I told all my other, let's say, friends and my whole ecosystem back in China that this is a great opportunity and that this can create additional value. I think in this regard, I think yes, it will just raise additional attention also in China to say, yeah, Southeast Asia is a great next step. Why should we look from China at the US as the next step, or perhaps even at Africa? We could also look at Southeast Asia, and this can work, and it's even more synergetic and sensible than to go basically across the ocean or something. In addition, I would say, of course, you can also interpret it as a wake-up signal for some other international players. Let it be an Amazon, or let it be other US players to say, wait a second, are we missing something here? Are we missing a great opportunity in Southeast Asia? And we've been looking at China, we've been looking at India, but a lot of things are happening now in Southeast Asia. Let's move into that more aggressively, and perhaps also with a different risk profile than we have behaved in the past. So I think we will see more attention, and this can have good things, and that can also create some bad aspects. But I think for exits, it will definitely fuel the system and fuel interest and discussions.
Right. So now, if we look at this, and Hanno, I am aware that there are certain things you cannot speak to, and some of them are not even clear what it is you can or cannot answer, so feel free to tell me not to pry. But if one were to look at this transaction and at what Lazada has built in details, revenues, country footprint, number of people involved, amount of support the ecosystem generated, the secondary effects we just discussed, what can we learn about Southeast Asia from this story? Because there are several narratives in Southeast Asia, right? If you listen to folks in Singapore, sometimes you hear about Singapore being the gateway to Asia. But you go to Jakarta and somehow Singapore doesn't come up in the conversation. Don't get me started on Ho Chi Minh City. So what do we now know about Southeast Asia as a proof point? Not just a theory, but we actually learned it.
I mean, what I very truly believe in, first, let's say market fundamentals matter. So it's super important, especially when you want to build a scalable business, and this is what we want to do eventually with all of our businesses. You know, look at markets that are sizable. I mean, number of people living there, growing GDP, growing internet penetration, and all of these things should, from my perspective, drive your decisions much stronger than the question whether, is it easy to do it there? Do we have all the logistic infrastructure yet in place? Or is payment super important, or can we still work with cash on delivery? So I think to build something great, you just need to look at the fundamentals and then also try to solve these problems rather than wait for somebody else to solve this problem for you. And I think this was like a great success of Lazada, just to say, okay, we still do e-commerce in countries where there's no digital payment infrastructure and where there's a very tricky, at least, logistic infrastructure. Just do it. And I think this is, I think for me, one of the biggest USPs and values also they created with this great company to basically offer Alibaba and the company that you get all this experience and how to solve these kind of problems for you. Secondly, I think this regional approach to try to capture significant market stakes in all of these countries. And I think Lazada has done, again, an excellent job to get a very balanced footprint across the region, which made it also much more appealing for a company like Alibaba to partner and to get a step and get a foot into their door. Yeah? So I think these are two very important aspects from my point of view. So I think there should be much more, from my perspective, to have this kind of regional focus. This is what we're also trying to do with a lot of the other ventures, and then you can deliver this kind of success stories.
So are you saying that Southeast Asia is a single region after all?
No, I think I would say the capability to master this kind of heterogeneous markets we have here. This is a real capability that can then be translated in a lot of value. Now, so I think if you really want to get superior returns, high valuations, and all of this, if your strategy is super, super narrow, only to say, I understand this market, you'll miss something. And I think this is just a great value you can bring to the table, and they can bring to the table, and I think a lot of our ventures can bring to the table to say, come on, we understand how to make it happen in the region, and we are not so much narrow-minded only to look at one country or one specific area.
Understood. So before I ask you the next follow-up question, which is how can this be translated to other frontier markets, do we agree? Is this a region, or is it still a constellation of single country opportunities? And I know the answer is it depends.
It depends. In principle, I would say each of the countries has so many own nuances that I really don't think of it as one common market. But it depends on obviously what types of business model you're building. If you're building a mobile gaming studio with like no offline touch points, you can be like a regional company from day one. If you're building more inventory heavy business models, you need like you build a warehouse. We're talking about like in the first place like a national play. So but that is discussion kind of like from my experience on from the Rocket days and what I've seen in all the investments in the portfolio companies, I'm probably more on the side that I think of it less as a region, but first win one country, like go in depth, really understand the business model, and then once you understand all the nuances of the business model and all the triggers, then it's great to make the regional play and expand internationally. But I see more the mistakes that people and entrepreneurs expand too early to other country than I see the mistake that people wait for too long.
Yep, $10,000 in revenue a month, give us money for expansion into 5 markets. Typical. Now, how do you think it will play out in terms of expansion from, let's talk a little bit about those markets that are not quite Middle East, not quite Indian subcontinent, not quite Southeast Asia, and geographic argument rages on. We are talking Pakistan, population of almost Indonesia, economy of the Philippines. We are talking Myanmar, Bangladesh, Nepal, Iran, Sri Lanka. Independent opportunities, sell company in Southeast Asia, build a pool of capital, build from scratch, or perhaps expansion markets, like MIG does, Steven was just here on stage, into Nepal from Southeast Asia, like 2C2P does into Myanmar from Thailand. Will those markets be an added opportunity for Southeast Asia story, or will that be a whole new standalone region? Or a constellation of single markets? How does Rocket think about this?
I would say, we think about these markets as a great opportunity, full stop, yeah? Because you mentioned some of the factors, huge populations, GDP growth, emerging middle class, etc. So I think it's a great opportunity. And then, of course, you need to see a bit on a venture by venture basis whether this is rather something to basically expand, or whether you are better off to build something new. Yeah? So for the e-commerce space, for example, for us it was a very clear decision to say, come on, there are so many topics still to be solved in Southeast Asia. Let's not overburden our operations, but build something dedicated only for these three markets, because we are talking about 500 million people only in this part of the greater region. So let's have a very, very dedicated focus there and build a separated company. And I think this makes a lot of sense because, again, to then it gives us basically both opportunities to still focus and do an excellent job in Southeast Asia, but still having a very early foot in the door in these markets as well. And we had a quick discussion before saying, okay, is it not too early, or should we wait longer, or whatsoever? And I believe it cannot be too early, especially in these markets, if you want to build a great company and you want to build a number one position. You need to be there early and you need to take the risk. But of course, you can hedge yourself a little bit to say, okay, this is a separated endeavor, and that's a super dedicated vehicle and a new company we build up there. And still, you don't lose the focus and you don't lose the management attention of all of your other activities you still have in Southeast Asia. So again, a bit of a dual strategy. And then, of course, you can speculate what may happen in 5 or 10 years. Are these markets then even merging together faster? Is there a consolidation? Is there consolidation rather with India, rather with China again, or rather with Southeast Asia? I don't know, but I know there's a great opportunity, and that's why we are extremely bullish around these markets as well.
How about folks with slightly less financial reserves, like VCs? Should we think about this as a standalone story or as an add-on?
Yeah, I'm a one-trick pony. I just understand Southeast Asia. So I wouldn't feel comfortable investing other people's money in Pakistan and Bangladesh. I have no edge. I have never built a company in these regions. So I know my limitations, and my limitations are within the boundaries of Southeast Asia. So that's where we are focused on investing. That's where we have our network. That's where we can really help entrepreneurs with our network and kind of our expertise in certain areas to build their business. I leave Pakistan and the rest to Hanno.
Well, that's it really, right? VCs are such territorial creatures, speaking of myself as well,
yes.
That we sometimes leave opportunities for these guys to move into a whole new region nobody else saw on the map before and build things in advance. So that's pretty much Rocket model, no?
Yeah, exactly. And that's. I mean, I would also sell it to you guys as a great opportunity, because perhaps a bit similar at the very early stage in some of the Southeast Asian markets in the ecosystem there, you probably need somebody, like Rocket or somebody with a similar strategy to try to build this in Pakistan, take also the risk and take the potential upside. But then, of course, I would hope that in 5 years from now we sit together here and discuss about the great ecosystem that was built in this part of the greater region, and the great exits we have achieved there as well, and a lot of entrepreneurs now looking at it with a different perspective. And that's what we are working on now. Of course, we never stop working. We will also not celebrate this too long. We move on to the next thing, and this will be the next challenge. And as I said, I'm extremely bullish and super optimistic that this can be a great success.
Yeah, I guess it's just I guess in hindsight we can say that Rocket, maybe we were a little bit early, but the timing actually seemed to be very good. Obviously, with the benefit of the hindsight, and the benefit of the hindsight, we can also say it really helped build the ecosystem. So if we just look at Indonesia, where I live, we have the initial founders of all the ventures. We have Nadim, who started Gojek, or Kevin was also at Zalora, who's the CFO. We have like Hadi Wenas, CEO at Matahari Mall. We have Stephen Kim, founder of Craved. We have Adrian Lee, founded Convergence Ventures, myself with Ventura. So I think just actually the initial people who started all the ventures, went on to build their own companies, and in that start, it really kick-started, I think, kind of that first trigger point was there, attracting talent, attracting entrepreneurs, taking all these people from their boring consulting and banking jobs and say, let's build businesses, this is much more exciting. So it was, I guess, a trigger point in hindsight. And I think that acquisition, or the partial acquisition now from Alibaba, could really be like the next trigger point that we see here in the region.
I would say that Rocket has, at some point of time, at least in my opinion, become less of a company and more of a cultural movement. It became a thing to go to Southeast Asia and contribute to building stuff back in Europe, back in Germany. And not only the companies and the teams that you mentioned, there are ex-Rocket guys within Garina's e-commerce operation, there are ex-Rocket guys within financial, fintech as it's called now, operation, all the way to payment systems. So to the entrepreneurs in the room, all the names that were just mentioned by Stefan, look them up. That's the hit list for your next angel round, because they did pretty well for themselves. We're in the last minute of the panel, and I know we are preventing you from going to lunch, so I think I'll wrap up right here unless you guys have any other thoughts on the matter. Good for now? Good.
Yeah.
The audience, you good? Thank you very much.